Good morning, Pastor Mike with you. And this is this week's View from the Pew, but we're in a kind of a different location, as you might see. I'm in my office. It's 7:30, an hour before I preach here at First English Lutheran in Monaga. And then I head off to Bethany Lutheran for services there. Then I get to slide home during a blizzard. So it's going to be an interesting day. Our reading today comes to us from Luke verses 9 through 28 through 36. Now, about 8 days after these sayings, he took with him Peter, John, and James and went up to the mountain to pray. And as he was praying, the appearance of his face was altered, and his clothing became dazzling white. And behold, two men were talking with him, Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory and spoke of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now Peter and those who were with him were heavy with sleep. But when they became fully awake, they saw the glory of the two men who stood with them, or with him. And as the men were parting from him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good that we are here. Let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." Not knowing what he said, as he was saying these things, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. And a voice came out of the cloud saying, "This is my son, my chosen one. Listen to him." And when the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone. And they kept silent and told no one in those days anything that they had seen. Well, it's obviously his Transfiguration Sunday, and many of us have those defining moments in our lives. A Jewish businessman in Chicago decided to send his son to Israel to absorb some of the culture of the Jewish homeland. When his son returned, his father asked him to tell him about his trip. The son said, "Papa had a great time in Israel, but I converted to Christianity." "Oy vey," said the father. "What have I done?" He decided to ask his friend Jacob what to do. Jacob said, "Funny you should ask. I too sent my son to Israel, and he came back a Christian. Perhaps we should go to the rabbi and see what we should do." So they went to see the rabbi. The rabbi said, "Funny you should ask. I too sent my son to Israel. He too came back a Christian." What is happening to our young people? Perhaps we should go talk to God and ask him what to do. The three of them prayed and explained what had happened to their sons and asked God what to do. Suddenly, a voice came loud and clear from the heavens. The voice said, "Funny you should ask. I too sent my son to Israel." Well, we know what happened with Jesus. He was the Christ in our Christianity. Life has a way of sometimes slipping up behind us and slapping us in the head. Sometimes it's a gentle slap. Other times it's not. A man was driving down the road. He passed a traffic camera and saw it flash. Astounded that he'd been caught speeding when he hadn't been speeding. The man turned around, going even slower and passing the camera once again. Flash! It went off again. He couldn't believe it. He was astounded. He turned around and, barely creeping, pulled up to the camera once again. Once again, the camera flashed. He guessed there must be some type of a problem with the camera, and he went on his way. 4 weeks later, he received 3 traffic citations for not wearing a seatbelt. Life can be cruel. In his book entitled Not What You Ask, TV's Andy Rooney lists 100 of his oldest and most fervently believed opinions. For instance, he said, "I don't like music that I can't hum." Well, some of us can relate to that. Or how about this one? "When I was young, I always assumed I liked carrots when I got older. I never did." Or this one: "If dogs could talk, It would take a lot of the fun out of owning one. On a more serious note, Rooney says, I don't accept the inevitability of my own death. I secretly think there might be some other way out. Well, since Andy Rooney died lately, I'm thinking maybe that theory didn't work out too well for him. Andy Rooney had one more. He said, the middle of the night, said Rooney, seems longer than it used to. Can anyone relate to this? If you've ever laid awake mulling over a deep hurt or a nagging worry, you know what he's talking about. The middle of the night can be mighty lonely and long. The story of Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration occurred at a time when the disciples were in the middle of their night. The story is told by Matthew, Mark, and Luke with an almost equal amount of detail. It's significant that each of the evangelists introduces his telling of the story with the word after. The word is something more than a connecting link, a bridge over a space of days. It's rather the key that unlocks the whole meaning and mystery of the Transfiguration. St. Luke, that we heard from today, begins with the version of the Transfiguration story like this. About 8 days after Jesus said this. Said what? Let's go back a little and see. Jesus had asked his disciples what people were saying about him. In response, Peter made this memorable confession, the first Apostles' Creed, so to speak. Thou art the Christ. Well, let the trumpet sound. This is one of those crescendo moments in the New Testament. Immediately, Jesus leads their mind down a totally celestial heights to the lowest depths of degradation, dishonor, and death. He shoots them down by saying, the Son of Man must suffer many things, he said to them, and be rejected of the elders, chief priests, and scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised up. In just a moment, he shattered the disciples' bright dream. Like many fearful nightmare, the foreshadowing of the cross fell upon their hearts, filling them with fear and gloom, striking down hope and courage and even faith itself. It would almost seem as if the disciples were unnerved, paralyzed by the blow, and his atrophy had stolen over their hearts and lips alike. The 6 days were filled with silence, without word or deed, as far as the records show. How shall their last hope be recalled, or courage be revived? They were in that bottom of the world moment in their lives. How shall they be taught that death does not end all, and one that life goes on after we lose it? The Transfiguration is the answer. Their experience on the Mount of Transfiguration would wake them in the middle of their long night. Have you ever experienced one of those long nights when your hopes are dashed and your mind and heart are filled with dread? During the terrible storms created by El Nino in 1998, a devastating tornado hit a southern community. In a TV interview, a third grader who had huddled with her classmates in an elementary school hallway as a funnel cloud roared overhead was asked if she was afraid, and she replied matter of fact, like, no, I just cried and prayed to Jesus. Have you ever been there crying and praying to Jesus? Well, I have. It's amazing the things that people can encounter and endure. A week ago, one of my congregation in the Twin Cities suffering from severe arthritis was looking forward to moving in with her daughter. On the eve of the move, she suffered a stroke that caused her paralysis and inability. Life can be cruel. She went on later in the week to pass away, and we've lost one of my dear friends. For me, my defining moment came on February 8th, 2007, after making my favorite meal. My wife Brenda had a seizure. A week later, she was gone. I entered a very dark night. Radio broadcaster Mort Krim tells of visiting a new Asian restaurant in his neighborhood. The place was already filled with customers. He remarked to the waitress that the new place seemed to be a success already. She replied that she knew that the restaurant would succeed because the owner had climbed to the mountain to get there. She wasn't exaggerating, as she explained the restaurant owner and his family had been forced to escape from Cambodia and immigrate to the U.S. because of persecution under the communist regime. They had literally climbed a rugged mountain to flee their country. And now in their new land, the family worked into the wee hours of every night and never once complained, the waiters reported. They were just so happy to be here in America. She knew their determined attitude and hard work would spell success for their restaurant. We admire people like that, don't we? The longer the night, the brighter the success shines in the light of day. But when we're in the middle of that dark night, climbing a mountain to escape an oppressive government, or sitting at the bedside of a loved one in their last hours, or lying in a hospital bed ourselves with tubes sticking out of us, or going through a checkbook in the wee hours of the morning, wondering how we'll ever make ends meet, or watching hopelessly as our teenager fouls up their lives. But whatever your long night might be, it's hard at such times to hold on to the promises of God. The disciples were in their dark night. They had left everything they had and placed their hopes in Jesus. Now Jesus tells them that he must be crucified. It's then that their hearts go numb with disbelief of what Luke is talking about. About 8 days after Jesus said this, he took Peter, James, and John with him and went up to the mountain to pray. As they were praying, the appearance of his face changed and his clothes became bright as a flash of lightning. Then Luke writes, Peter and his companions were very sleepy, but when they became fully awake, they saw his glory and two men standing with him. In the middle of their long night, their hearts were laden with anxiety and despair. The disciples became fully awake to the truth of the gospel. Christ is the Lord of creation. The fact that Jesus must be taken away from them did not negate the promises that had brought into their lives. There's a dawn that follows every darkness, hope that follows every despair, a beginning that follows every ending. The experience on the Mountain Transfiguration came at precisely that moment when the disciples were prepared to believe the worst about their future. They were ready to throw up their hands in despair and resignation. In the middle of their long night, the hope was delivered. Excuse me. An unknown woman telling of losing her mother, whom she called her dearest friend, to cancer. Always supportive, her mother clapped loudest at the woman's school plays, held a box of tissue while listening to her first heartbreak, comforted her on her father's death, encouraged her in college, and prayed for her entire life. When her mother's illness was diagnosed, the woman's sister had a new baby, and her brother was recently married to his college sweetheart. So what fell on her, the 27-year-old, middle child without entanglements, to take care of mother? She counted it an honor. Now she sat at her mother's funeral. The hurt was intense. She found it hard to breathe. What now, Lord? She cried, as she sat there alone in the hard pew, grieving during the service. Her father and sister had their families all with them. She had no one. Her place had been with her mother, preparing her meals, helping her walk, taking her to the doctor, seeing to her medication, reading the Bible together. Now her mother was gone and she was left alone. Then she heard a door open, and it slammed shut in the back of the church. Quick footsteps hurried along the carpeted floor. An exasperated young man looked around briefly and then sat next to her, one of the only seats left before the funeral started. He began to sniffle. "I'm late," he explained, though no explanation was necessary. After several eulogies, he leaned over to the woman and asked, "Why do they keep calling Mary by the name of Margaret?" "Oh, because that was her name," said the woman. "Margaret, never Mary. No one called her Mary," she whispered. She wondered why this person couldn't have sat on the other side of church. He interrupted her grieving. with his tears and fidgeting. Who was this stranger anyway? No, that isn't correct, he said, with several people glancing around him at his whispering. Her name was Mary Peters. That isn't who this is, the woman said. Isn't this the Lutheran church, he said. No, she said, the Lutheran church is across the street. I believe you have the wrong funeral, sir. The solemnness of the occasion, mixed with the realization of the man's mistake, bubbled up inside the young woman and came out as laughter. She cupped her hand over her face, hoping it would appear that she was sobbing. The creaking pew gave her away. Sharp looks from mourners only made the situation even more hilarious to her. She peeked at the bewildered, misguided man seated beside her. He was laughing too, and as he glanced around, decided it was too late for an uneventful exit. She imagined her mother laughing at the final amen. Both the woman and the man ran out the door and into the parking lot. I do believe we'll be the talk of the town, he smiled. Hi, my name is Rick. And since he had missed his aunt's funeral, he asked her out for a cup of coffee. That afternoon began a lifelong journey. A year after meeting, this couple was married in a country church where he happened to be the assistant pastor. This time they both arrived at the church on time and at the right place. The woman writes, in my time of sorrow, God gave me laughter. In a place of loneliness, God gave me love. This past June, we celebrated our 22nd wedding anniversary, she said. In the middle of a long night, God gives us hope. That's what Transfiguration is all about. The dispirited disciples needed, at that moment of their lives, to see the glory of Christ revealed. And when the glory was revealed, they were able to give their lives back on track again. And that's what many of us need to know in the middle of our long night. God is still God. Christ is still the Lord. Beyond the darkness, whatever the darkness may be, there is a dawn. Dr. Hope Kohler had a situation on her hands. One of her patients, 5-year-old Billy, was suffering from an aggressive lymphoma. Billy's parents wanted the son to die in New Mexico, not in a Boston hospital where he had been treated. They couldn't afford a flight. So Hope set about finding transportation for them. She and the family got as far as Dallas, but Billy got too sick to continue. Commercial airline would not carry someone in his condition. Hope got Billy admitted to a local hospital. She stayed with him around the clock, trying to keep him comfortable. Finally, Hope located a doctor who owned his own plane. He got the boy home just in time. Billy died soon after landing in New Mexico. In addition to his name and dates on his tombstone, Billy's grateful parents inscribed one more thing: Hope brought him home. The line should be added to tombstones all over the world. Hope brought him home. The experience on the Mount of Transfiguration restored the disciples' hope. In the middle of our long nights, may it restore our hope as well. That's this week's View from the Pew. I'm Pastor Mike.